Hi, today we're going to talk about citizen engagement in the political process. And what we'll learn is we have a choice in terms of getting citizens involved. We can get them involved in building a wall or a bridge. There are really two approaches to communications. One is called broadcast, and the other is called narrowcast. Now, in broadcast, what we're talking about is television, radio, newspapers, billboards. In narrowcast, we're talking about telephone, we're talking about direct mail, and person to person. The internet somehow slides between the two. It can be used for both broadcast and for narrowcast. One of the things we know about broadcast is that it informs and generates interest, but there's no feedback. You can't respond to the radio or the television, perhaps on talk shows, but there's no real feedback as to what people are thinking. The other thing we know is that it takes about 16 or 17 hits, and by hit we mean an impression. If you listen to the radio and hear an ad 17 times, or see the same ad in the newspaper, or if you have a combination, you see the same ad on television, a newspaper, billboard, and you hear it on radio 16 or 17 times, that ad will begin to convince you. So what we know about broadcast is that it informs and it also gets people interested in what's going on. Narrowcast is different. It truly involves people because you're actually talking to people or actually writing directly to them. And so with fewer numbers, 6 or 7 hits, you can cement people to your particular position. And it's the way in which we involve and engage people in grassroots. So what we're going to be talking today is about narrowcast, about grassroots participation, how to build a network of people who will support you and who will be very much involved in helping you get done whatever it is you want to get done. Another thing we know about narrowcast, it cements the relationship, but also it authenticates and reinforces the broadcast message. What we mean by that, you may see an ad for a beautiful car, and all the ads talk about what a great car it is. But if your next door neighbor buys a car and you ask him or her, well, what do you think of the car? If they say it's terrific, that reinforces the broadcast message. If they say, I don't think I'd ever buy another one of these cars, that destroys the broadcast message. In other words, your neighbor helps reinforce what you're hearing on radio and television. Now, there are a couple of ways to settle an issue. We talk about two ways being the authoritarian way and the nurturing way. And the key thing to remember here, the authoritarian way is built on constraint and domination, usually by one God-ordained view. In the U.S., we talk about the melting pot. Everybody has to talk like us, dress like us, pray like us, and if they don't, then they're not real Americans. The nurturing approach is shared values, where the notion of society is a tossed salad, that we can all be citizens and yet celebrate differences. We celebrate different sexual orientation, different cultures, different languages. It's a more nurturing and relational point of view. So the melting pot, everybody gets thrown in, stirred up, and they're supposed to look the same. So they can say you're not a real American if you don't look the same, if you don't speak the same, if you don't practice the same religion. Whereas the community advocacy tossed salad, you can have green lettuce and orange carrots, red tomatoes. You can have citizens enjoying the same rights even if they don't look the same or talk the same or have different lifestyles. The two organizing approaches built off of this, and they're both successful. We're not saying one is better than the other. They're both successful. There's an old saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, in the authoritarian way, the leader says to the people, you must obey. And often say, because it's God's law, which really what he's saying, it's my interpretation of God's law. And the golden rule is he who has the gold rules. Now, in a nurturing way, The leader is saying you must trust. You must trust your heart and your belief in fairness. And the golden rule in the nurturing situation is do unto others as you wish others to do unto you. And I think examples of authoritarians would be Hitler, certainly Chavez, Putin, our country, Trump. From a corporate standpoint, companies like Walmart and Apple, the military, many religions are very authoritarian, and many police departments who view the community as suspect. Nurturing, we know that Mandela in South Africa, certainly Obama in our own country, Simone Perez in Israel, these were very nurturing leaders. And from a corporate standpoint, we know there are companies like Intel, Chrysler, Costco. They're all multi-billion-dollar companies that operate in a more nurturing way. They really value their employees and include their employees in all the decision-making process. There are a few religions that operate this way, and there are some police departments that have been willing to engage in cooperative approach to policing and to building trust in the community. Here's what an authoritarian model looks like. The boss is in charge of everything. So if an idea starts one place, in order for it to be approved and work with somebody else, you've got to go up the chain of command and back down the chain of command before the idea can be taken up by somebody else. It's a very hierarchical, very bureaucratic, and it's a very difficult way to get anything done. Nobody moves unless the boss says it's okay to move. It's usually controlled by one person or very few. If you want to see an authoritarian person in a meeting, that's the person who is picking up his or her phone to use their phone or to use their laptop while everybody else is focused on the problem at hand. They decide, what I have to do is more important than anyone else. So to heck with the rest of you, I'm going to use my phone. Now in a nurturing situation, like Costco, like Intel, like Chrysler, the boss is still the boss, but ideas can start and end anywhere. And everybody gets engaged in the process, and they share ideas because they have a shared responsibility to achieve an end result that everybody buys into. The challenge with the authoritarian, it's built on a conflict model. It's the authoritarian parent who's always in charge. It's very hierarchical. It's never in error. There are no mistakes allowed. And acceptance within this model, acceptance is always conditional. I will not love you unless you behave a certain way. Whereas the consensus model, built on the nurturing family, is built on relationships of trust. Mistakes are allowed as part of the learning process. The leader listens and includes everybody. And acceptance is unconditional. They accept people, they don't place any conditions. Well, I will only accept you if you're straight. Now the parent of a gay child says, I love you because you're my child. I don't sit in judgment on the fact that you may be gay. That's a very different approach. One is accepting unconditional basis, and one is accepting only on a conditional basis. Now, when we organize on a political campaign, there are 4 processes that we go through. We have to agree on a vision, then a strategy, and the vision and strategy drive the message. I highly recommend that you see 3 movies. 2 of them I'll talk about right here. The first is called Invictus. It's a movie about South Africa. It's a true story. It's about how Nelson Mandela, in effect, said to the black people, we will not do to the white people what the white people did to us. He said, let's build an inclusive and a society of all South Africans. And if you want to understand strategy, and strategy is really the next logical step to achieve the vision, I would suggest the Chilean movie called No, which talks about the fact that 2 groups both wanted to bring down Pinochet, both wanted to change the way Chile operated, but they had 2 different views of how to proceed. One was a very negative view, and the other was a very positive view. So you can have different strategies on how to achieve a vision, and there's often conflict on the strategies. But so long as the vision unifies you, you can work through how to proceed in terms of the next logical strategic step. Then we develop programs to accomplish the strategy, and finally tactics. And the way it looks is like this. The vision is long-term, very long-term. How do we unify the country? How do we bring it together? How do we unify it so that everybody accepts the long-term vision of what it is to be a U.S. citizen, for example? The U.S. has a vision that all men are created equal. But when that statement was first created, it only included men, did not include women. It only included white men. It only included men who spoke English and probably were Christian and who were probably straight. So the vision is long-term. The strategy is how do we change things to achieve the vision? So a strategy for women was to knock on the door and say, hey, I'm a man. I may have physical characteristics that are different, but I'm part of Homo sapiens. And it allowed black people to knock on the door and say, I'm a man and I'm not being treated equally. It allowed people who speak a different language, whether it's Spanish or Arabic or Chinese, to knock on the door and say, I'm a man, I should be treated equally. Programs are the things that we use, advertising, different kinds of fundraising programs, or grassroots programs to organize people. And the tactics are the things that we do on a day-to-day basis to achieve our strategy. So when we're organizing to build a wall, here's the authoritarian approach. The authoritarian view of the world is us versus them. They don't see it in any other context. And usually what they're doing is building upon fear. The message is they're out to get us. There's some kind of conspiracy. Everybody's against us. They play very heavily on victimization. These other people get all the breaks. They are to blame. In the U.S., it's illegal immigrants or people with whom we've been in conflict. It's all the imagined slights that are made real by fears that people have. So it's a basis for a refusal to change or a return to some kind of idealized past. So the vision of an authoritarian in our country is that the country needs to be made great again by restoring the right people to power. So the question is, what do we mean by great? I mean, we could say, does that mean these are white people, Christian people, straight people? Is it a challenge that we have a black man in the White House? So the strategy of an authoritarian is to restore law and order by putting the right people back in charge, however he defines right. And their message would be, we're not a great nation. Somehow we're not okay. For example, when it comes to international football, we're certainly not a great power there, as you all well know, except in women's football. And there we did win the World Cup, as all remember. So it may be sad that we're not a good football nation, but, we're a great nation generally. And it contradicts everything that we know about our country. And somehow it's made up by authoritarians to pretend that somehow we're not as good as we can be. And we are. We shouldn't be feeling this way. The programs that an authoritarian builds are based upon negatives, that find out everything we can that's bad about our opponent, launch a negative campaign attacking our opponent, build fundraising on a conspiracy that they are hurting us without ever defining they. And we enlist a cadre of people. And we use the word cadre because these are people who follow blindly. They don't have any thoughts of their own. They just blindly follow the authoritarian leader. And their big tactic is to blame the victim. If someone is poor, blame them for not having the initiative to take care of themselves. Blame them for making mistakes if they're not well educated. Blame them for being sick. Blame the woman if she's raped. Always blame the woman if she's raped, as though she was in the wrong place, or she was at the wrong time, or she was not dressed right, that somehow she was asking to be raped. Anyway, blaming the victim is an authoritarian tactic. If we want to build a bridge, it's an entirely different approach. First of all, we don't see two sides. We see certainly there are two sides, but That's a small group. There are those of us who are saints, and there may be some people who are sinners. There's a large group of people who can be intellectually convinced that our approach toward nation building is a better approach. It's a one that brings everybody together. And it's the notion of building a case from the saints to the savables with rational views. So in the U.S., the vision is that all men are created equal. And it means that all people have treated equally in terms of access to voting and benefits of society. The French philosopher Camus once said, "I should like to be able to love my country and still love justice." And that to me is the absolutely most beautiful statement, that I should be able to love my country and still love justice, meaning I can love my country and still criticize it when I believe it's doing the wrong thing. Nurturing strategy to restore faith in institutions by assuring all citizens a right to be heard. I believe one of the great messages of the last of this century is "Yes, we can," which was Obama's message. The subtext of each is that America and/or Americans can meet any challenge and succeed if they're willing to come together, despite differences in ethnicity, race, sex, age, sexual preference, or country of origin, language, even if they have different languages, and we can work through our differences and arrive at a compromise. It's very inclusive by nature, by tone, and in fact. The research programs of a nurturing program is to build proof that the proposals to enhance life are workable, deal with shared concerns with others with whom we can build a coalition. Advertising is to explain ideas for new initiatives, fix what's wrong, not destroy everything. Fundraising is built on the need to provide educational efforts to reach out from our own supporters to the savables. And the grassroots, we build a volunteer group among those who seek positive solutions to real problems and trust that they're supporting the process. Real change will occur. The tactics we use: positive stories, stories about those in need who benefit from proposed programs, understand the rationale for supporting change, and if someone has erred, focus on repentance and repatriation. In a nurturing culture, we try to avoid retribution. We talk about repentance and repatriation and try to avoid retribution. So, in the building bridge of a process, first can begin with is a wonderful thought from a poet named Catherine Ann Porter, who said, "Love must be learned and learned again and again. There is no end to it. Hate needs no instruction, but only waits to be provoked." And what she's saying is that if you choose the nurturant path, it's a constant daily process of building constructively. It's very easy to tear it apart with fear and with hatred. Now, what we need to know is, as we start, is that we as human beings have two parts in our brain. One part is the amygdala. It's 1,000,000+ years old, and it controls feelings and basic instincts. It talks about flight or fight. It's what we used to avoid the mastodons when they came charging through the jungle. It's also what we use to avoid a bus as it comes, or a car as it comes hurtling down the street. And so flight or fight is a very important part of our brain. It often operates on old information. It's also what motivates lust. The neocortex, which is a much younger part of our brain, is only about 10,000 years old. It's what directs us towards judgment and thoughtfulness. It allows love, real love, based on tenderness and trust. And it's also what houses hope, that life can be better and things can change. But we need to understand the fear that people have in order to address those fears. We need to understand that people are afraid of change. They'll say, why do we need to change? Things are working well for me at the moment. What happens to me if change is made? Intimidation. My life is about to be turned upside down, and this new idea would be the most miserable experience ever in my life. So we need to understand that we're dealing with fear if we want to bring about change. The fear that someone may not get what one wants. They may lose what one has. They fear the loss of prestige or power or wealth. A fear that somehow they may lose control. A fear that I will have no rights, no control, no role to play in this transition. And a fear that no one will listen to me. So they're very real human fears. We cannot simply dismiss people as you don't understand. We have to take into account that people have genuine fears of change in order to, if we're going to organize them in a nurturing way. So when it comes to shaping our decisions, we need to appreciate that feelings count as much, sometimes more than facts. Now, feelings are not facts. They come from the emotional dominant part of the brain. They are real in the sense that they exist, but they're not facts. So there's always a battle between thought of change and feeling about change. It's a constant battle that we need to be aware of. The challenge for each person is, how do I harmonize feelings and thoughts regarding change? Challenge for every family, every community to harmonize head and heart. It's a challenge for tribes and communities to choose between acceptance as conditional, which is an authoritarian way to proceed. I will not love you unless you're straight. I will not love you unless you do what I tell you to do. I will not love you unless you go to the right church, as opposed to acceptance as unconditional. I will love you regardless of how you live your life. I will love you. I may not like what you're doing. That's different. But I will love you, and I will support you as a human being. It's a nurturing way of proceeding. So we must begin understanding fear that people have. And that's why we say we need to internalize the notion that we always start from where people are, not where we want them to be. We need to learn how to respect and trust with our customers and among our fellow employees, people in the community, and others with whom one is associated by listening and identifying shared concerns rather than focusing on shared differences. In other words, it's very easy to think about the differences that we had, but what do we share in terms of our concerns? I mean, when we get down to basics, every human being that I know of wants housing, they want education for their children, they want food on the table, they want clothes on their back. How do we build up on what we share as opposed to what we are, in which ways we are different? And appreciate and help deal with others' fears. So in listening, what we do is seek how various groups think, feel, react, and deal with the process of change. We avoid comparing one another because there's a saying in English, compare and despair. If I compare myself to somebody else, I'm never good enough. They're always got more money than I have. They're better looking than I have. They have a nicer house than I have. They have a better job than I have. When I compare, I'm always in despair. But my question then is, how do we explore opportunities where we share things? I mean, I may not wear the best suits, but I wear suits. I may not have the most money, but I have enough to pay my bills. I mean, the question is, how do we find out the things that we can share in common? So we explore opportunities to build from love or need to change and to overcome existing hate and fear of change. And then we identify and recognize shared goals and positive solutions. And again, we're prepared to listen, always to listen to their ideas. If we choose a nurturing approach, we are welcome and include others and their ideas. And we adapt and amend our own ideas so that the ideas of the groups can be accomplished. It's a wonderful statement by a character in a novel. And it was said so eloquently that I chose to quote it. You can't always doubt yourself. If someone's going to define my freedom, I'd rather it be people who weren't completely sure they were always right. Uncertainty can be a discipline, not in the sense of being rudderless or indecisive, but in the sense of knowing we are not infallible, of being open to the possibility that our judgments aren't definitive and beyond revising. I mean, how do we remain flexible in life? Understand that there's no absolutes in our lives, that once we get into absolutes, we get into trouble. How do we accept the fact that, things can change and it's okay to change? Now, I mentioned the movie Invictus that talks about vision, the vision for South Africa. I talked about the movie No, a great Chilean movie about strategy. That strategy is a choice on how to achieve a vision. Both sides wanted to get rid of Pinochet and to establish a democracy, but there were two different ways to proceed, and there's always different strategies. Pride is a movie that I highly recommend because it's the perfect example of what I've been talking about. There was a time in the mid-1980s when the coal miners went on strike, and traditionally when they went on strike, the government settled very quickly. But Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister, and she said, we're not going to settle. As far as I'm concerned, they can starve to death. And she let them starve. She refused to concede anything to the miners. And while they were out on strike and starving, about the same time, the gay community in London held its annual event. And there were about maybe 1,000 of them. And they got beat up by the police, and they got put in jail, and they got harassed and made fun of and spit upon, and all kinds of terrible things happened to them. And the police did nothing. The police were part of it. The police beat them up. So what the gays decided was, maybe we could form a coalition with the miners. And there was some hesitancy among the gay community at first. Well, why would we do that? Well, the gay leaders said, well, we share with the union leaders something in common. We both are we have Margaret Thatcher as a foe. We have the police as a foe. We have the conservative press as a foe. So maybe we could work together on what we jointly have in common as our foe. And yes, there was a hesitancy among the unions to accept the fundraising and the money that the gays were able to raise. But eventually, the miners did accept the support of the gays, and they were very appreciative of it. And they said to the gay community, someday we'll be there for you. Well, the following year, the gays went to start their parade. And again, there was about 1,000 of them. And they were surrounded by police. And the police suddenly said, wait, you can't start. There's a traffic jam, and we have to clear that up first. And the gay community waited, and suddenly 500 or 600 buses arrived, jam-packed with miners from all over the country. And the miners got off their buses, and they got together with the gays, and they said, we're marching together with you for gay rights. And the miners led the labor union movement, the Labor Party movement, to accept gays and to acknowledge gays as human beings with all the rights of straight people. And that was the beginning of the gay movement and the successful gay movement in the United Kingdom. So what we're talking about is that as strange as two people may be from one another, if they can find commonality, they can work together. And the movie Pride is a wonderful example of that.